The world seems to be obsessed with serial killers. There are dozens of biopics and documentaries on Netflix and YouTube, glamorizing history's most infamous individuals. When you hear the word serial killer, the obvious names that come to mind are Son of Sam, Ted Bundy, or John Wayne Gacy. These killers are horrific individuals who are only famous due to the Hollywood publicity. However, their crimes pale in comparison to one Pakistani serial killer,
Javed Iqbal.
December 1999, a letter was received to the Lahore police and a local newspaper confessing to the murders of 100 boys, all aged between 6 and 16. In the letter, the murderer claimed to have strangled and dismembered the victims, mostly runaways and orphans living on the streets of Lahore, and disposed of their bodies using vats of hydrochloric acid. He then dumped the remains in a local river. Signed at the end was the name
Javed Iqbal, 16B Ravi Road.
The police and media acted swiftly on the chilling confession. Iqbal confessed in his letter that he planned to drown himself in the Ravi River following his crimes, but after unsuccessfully dragging the river with nets, police launched what was, at that time, the largest manhunt Pakistan had ever witnessed. The police searched Iqbal's house, where they found disturbing evidence of his gruesome acts. Bloodstains adorned the walls and floor, while photographs of the victims were discovered in plastic bags, meticulously labeled with handwritten notes. Additionally, police came across the chain that Iqbal claimed he used to strangle his victims. Even more horrifying were the 2 vats of acid containing partially dissolved human remains left in the open, accompanied by a note claiming that the bodies were deliberately not disposed of to ensure authorities would find them. The level of premeditation and callousness displayed in his actions sent shockwaves through the nation. In his confession letter, Javed Iqbal revealed that his motive for committing these unimaginable acts was rooted in perceived injustice. He held a grudge against the Lahore police, whom he believed had unfairly arrested him on charges related to an act of sodomy against a young runaway boy in the 1990s. Although no charges were brought against him for this particular offense, it appeared to fuel his thirst for vengeance. In his twisted logic, Iqbal sought to make 100 mothers experience the same pain and suffering his mother endured before her death. His own mother had witnessed his decline, and he vowed to inflict similar suffering on others, leaving a trail of devastation in his wake. As foreign journalists descended onto Lahore, police investigators felt the heat from the government to quickly bring the case to a close. They had an admission of guilt and evidence. But Javed Iqbal, who baited the police and journalists with his exploits, was nowhere to be found. Unable to locate Iqbal, police arrested his relatives and, for accomplices, teenage boys who had shared Iqbal's 3-bedroom flat. That's when his dark and complicated past began to unravel. Iqbal came from a large family with 5 brothers and 4 sisters. His father owned a steel pipe-making business in the area. By the middle-class standards of the area, the family was quite well off. Iqbal had been a voracious reader. He kept diaries and wrote for magazines. He constantly made a ruckus at home and got into fights with neighborhood peers. At times, he behaved in ways that were hard to explain. Iqbal was actually a homosexual, a reality his conservative Muslim family refused to acknowledge, yet one that everyone around him knew. Years later, Iqbal would write that a faith healer had warned his family that bad things would happen if he was forced to marry a woman. Over time, his neighbors and friends say they started to see glimpses of a sinister demon in him. As he entered his 20s, he began exhibiting traits of a manipulative pedophile who had a liking for pubescent boys. A sodomy complaint was filed against him, but he bribed the police and the parents to hush up the matter. That incident put a wedge between him and his brothers, who wanted to go their separate ways. So once the family inheritance was distributed, Iqbal came into possession of a hefty sum. The account of Iqbal's life becomes bizarre from this point onwards. He built a house and opened a metalworks workshop of his own. Almost all his employees were underage boys, most of them runaways. He provided them with food and lodging, bought them new clothes, and often took them for road trips to Mori, a resort town in the north. One of the boys was Sajid, who became one of his trusted lieutenants. He opened up a video game arcade in a store close to his house. Like flies attracted to a sugary syrup, boys would flock there at all hours of the day. When people began questioning why Iqbal would only hire young boys at his workshop or keep them as helpers in his house, he'd say he was doing the runaway children a favor and that he loved them. Iqbal had, all along, exhibited traits and aspects of his personality that resembled those associated with well-documented serial killers. He took pictures and kept diaries containing detailed descriptions of his victims and how he met them. From May to December 1999, Iqbal used the young employees who worked and lived with him, including Sajid, Nadim and Sabir, to lure teenagers to his house, where he then assaulted and strangled them with a metal chain. After killing the boys, Iqbal dismembered their bodies and placed their remains in large vats of hydrochloric acid to dissolve his victims' flesh and bones. Then, once the boys' bodies were reduced to little more than liquid, Iqbal poured the contents of the barrels into the sewer or a river near his home. On December 3rd, the local newspaper printed the story on its front page under the headline, "Claim of Murder of 100 Kids." The newspaper published the names of the victims, along with pictures of 57 of the slain boys, many of them wearing cheeky smiles. All hell broke loose as soon as the issue hit the stands. The bundles of clothes and shoes found at Iqbal's house were brought for identification to a police station. As word spread, grieving parents flooded the evidence room. Mothers wailed as they recognized the kameez and shalwar of their missing boys. Fathers cursed themselves for failing to protect their children and swore to take revenge. After being on the run for nearly a month, Iqbal showed up at the office of local newspaper on the night of December 29th. He walked up to the newspaper's reception desk in worn-out slippers, with a days-old beard and in clothes smeared with dust, and said, "I'm Javed Iqbal, the killer of 100 children." He spoke to journalists for an hour, detailing how he had committed the murders and disposed of the bodies, before he was handed over to the police. The police filed murder charges, with Iqbal as the main suspect, along with 3 of his employees, Sajid, Nadim, Sabir, both minors. His trial, which took place under a constant media spotlight, was a public affair, with the court often crammed to the brim with people. Public anger was such that Iqbal had to be escorted to the court under the guard of more than a dozen police officers for fear that parents might lynch him. Over the next 4 weeks, prosecutors presented more than 100 witnesses, including dozens of family members of the missing boys. The police managed to find the driver of the rickshaw that one of Iqbal's employees had used to take acid drums to a river in order to dispose of them. The trial lasted just over a month, during which time the judge conducted proceedings almost every day under a constant media spotlight. In the end, the defense lawyers for Iqbal and the other accused had little chance against an overwhelming body of evidence. On March 16, 2000, a little over a month since the trial began, the judge announced his judgment, which was nothing short of flimsy. The judge ruled that Iqbal and Sajid were to be hanged at Minoy, Pakistan, and that their bodies were to be cut into 100 pieces and dissolved in acid in front of the families of the victims. A year after their conviction, Iqbal and one of his helpers Sabir committed a double suicide in their prison cells, which were next to each other. They used their shirts as ropes to hang themselves, according to police.